about 1 o'clock now. I think we can start up. Let's talk a little bit about the shutdown because I wrote a piece earlier in the week making the argument that Democrats are actually this is I think not what people expected, not what I expected. I mean, I wrote a piece, about a week or two ago, basically arguing the Democrats are making a huge mistake in trying to shut down the government. But what's happened since then is the Democrats appear to be winning the messaging battle around the shutdown. And I think there's a couple things at play here. I think one is there's genuine antipathy toward Trump in the electorate, and that is almost certainly people, irrespective of the facts, which I think is a point I would like to make. People are really tribal and partisan these days. They're just going to assume that Trump is the bad guy, and that's sort of what's happening. The second thing I think is that shutdowns, I think Republican parties associated with shutdowns more than Democrats, they're the ones who have the government down. And so people are blaming them. But the third factor is I think their messaging has simply been better. So I'm curious, Brian, what do you think? I mean, how do you think this is playing out?
So first, a sort of hot take, big picture, and then I will respond to that. The hot take, big picture is I think that this will matter not at all by the time voters are going to the
Oh, I
polls in
agree with
most
that.
places next year. Like I think people forget shutdowns. I think we have this mythical idea of shutdowns as being this big political impact because Bill Clinton ran rings around Newt Gingrich, and it helps him get reelected. But that actually gets to why I think Democrats are winning this. When Democrats can say, we are fighting, the government is shut down. We don't want this. We're doing it because we are fighting for you. We are fighting for your health care. Marjorie Taylor Greene is out there saying we need to extend these Obamacare subsidies because my
Yeah,
kids' premiums are going to go up. Okay.
crazy.
And I know I saw a Republican I was tweeting this morning that like only 7% of people have their plans through the Affordable Care Act and the exchanges and stuff, but the average Americans take umbrage at making anybody's health care more expensive.
I think that's right.
And when you can make it seem like you're fighting for the little guy, people are going to side with you. Damn it, the Republican arguments about undocumented migrants are absolutely idiotic on this topic, and they've messaged it very poorly. But I
Yeah,
really think it's that, Democrats are fighting for people. It's something that is easy to understand. And, Michael, the other thing that I think we have to factor in here is Americans are not particularly tuned into government. The people watching us probably are. But the average American can tell you more about what happened on Monday Night Football, maybe, than they can about what's happening in government. And that
right.
matters because we have unified government. And so I've been saying for weeks and weeks and weeks to my subscribers that I don't believe, I said, hey, maybe we need to think twice about how we're going to understand this because you have to explain to them that the filibuster is a thing, that Republicans have unified control, but they still need, 7 Democrats to
You're right.
vote to keep the
Right.
government open. And I'm not sure that the average not tuned into politics person understands any of that and understands that it is technically the Democrats shutting things down.
Yeah. To your point, I think that's exactly right. I agree with that 100%. I also think the messaging, how so the messaging doesn't matter that much and in the larger scheme of things. But I will say, having said that, the idea that Republicans have tried to make this argument that Democrats are shutting the government down to give free health care to illegal aliens, that's their word verbiage, not
Yep.
mine, is just, I think, a really silly talking point. Because first of all, does anyone really believe that? I mean, I know that MAGA really believe that, but the idea that Democrats are shutting the government down just to give free health care to migrants just seems like it's such a ridiculous accusation. And I think it's one that plays with the MAGA base. But I think most voters are tuning out. If you ask people like, okay, what's more likely? Republicans want to cut health care. They want to cut Obamacare, which they're trying to do for basically 15 years. Or Democrats want to give free health care to migrants. I think you're more likely to believe the argument about Republicans. So I just think it's not a helpful message. I also think that Trump is been the worst enemy for them on this. I mean, yesterday he goes on TV and he says, we're going to suggest that maybe, well, the first this memo comes out that says maybe they're not going to pay furloughed workers who've been off the job, haven't gotten paid for a week now. And Trump sort of says, well, maybe we'll do that. I mean, that is the kind of message that I think just pisses people off. And it's also off message, right? It makes Democrats look cruel. I mean, Republicans makes them look cruel, makes them look indifferent to the suffering that they're creating. And it sort of plays into, I think, people's general viewpoint about this White House. And I just think it's off message. It takes them away from talking they want to talk about.
Well,
Yeah,
Michael,
go
you know
ahead.
why
Sorry.
they're off message? They're off message because they don't have a message. They literally are groping around trying to find
They
something.
could have a message, right? They
they,
could
they
have a
they
message.
could have a message. They could say the reason you can't get your what you need from the government is the Democrats' fault. Now the other thing that makes their healthcare message about undocumented migrants even worse is they're making this about ERs. They're trying to make this about the I forget the is it MLATA whatever
And
the
Lana. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
This is a law Ronald Reagan signed into law in the 1980s that says that if somebody comes to the emergency room and is dying, they got to take care of them, which to most Americans is basic compassion. Somebody's having a heart attack, you treat them. You don't ask, do you have
I,
insurance, sir?
I wrote a whole piece about this for MSNBC. Like, what the hell is this argument? Like, you're going to sit here and say that people who are dying that you should check their if they're immigrants or not. I mean,
Yeah,
this is not something people are. I mean, I think everyone kind of understands that you treat people if they're in a life
right.
threatening condition. I don't care what their legal status is, and nobody should
Right.
care.
And their argument is, well, oh, if you go to an ER, you're going to have to wait longer and it's going to cost you more. And it's all the fault of the undocumented migrants. But I really do think it just comes off as, okay, these people are assholes. These people are saying, this guy's got a heart attack, but nope, he's undocumented. He's got to die right here. Sorry, we can't treat you. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just being an asshole.
I think I agree with you. I think there is a political downside to being seen as a prick, and I think
Yeah.
Republicans seem like pricks on this particular issue. And I don't, and I think it plays what we're saying earlier. They do not have a good message on the shutdown, which I am surprised by. And they should be hammering Democrats on the fact Democrats shut the government down and the suffering this is creating. But of course, they don't give a shit what the suffering it creates. They don't. They want the government to be shut down. So I just think I think I underestimated how poor the messaging would be from the GOP side. I also am surprised that they're not trying to propose legislation to put Democrat like say we're going to reopen Department of
Oh,
Homeland Security or the
oh.
Pentagon. I'm surprised they're not
No, no,
doing
no,
that.
go beyond that. Voting on Democrats want the House to come back to vote on paying the troops, and they won't do it. Mike Johnson hit on this thing, and let's be honest, Mike Johnson is not exactly the most brilliant political strategist you're ever
He
going to
really
find.
no.
He decided to hit on this strategy of let's keep the House out of session until Congress comes back. They have not been in session since I think September 19th. Okay. He's worried that if you have a bunch of bored congressmen wandering the hallways, they're going to say things that cause trouble. And he's, doesn't want to deal with other issues and stuff like that. But if they're not there and they're not voting on this, usually that's what you do. You make them vote over and over again to reopen the most popular things.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. That's what
without that, you're not being able to kind of box anybody in. And here's the thing: even at the Senate, they're not doing it. But even if they did, the only Democratic senator for whom any of these votes really matter is John Ossoff. There is like no other
yeah.
swing state Democrat who's
Well,
in cycle, who's the rest are retiring, right? New Hampshire or Michigan, they're open seats.
yeah, it's true. You're right. Is there no other Democratic incumbents who were in vulnerable seats?
Doesn't
I
seem
guess
like it.
no, I guess you're
I
right.
think,
That's a
yeah.
good
So
point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. It's a
it
great point.
So the Senate, even if they vote on that stuff, there's not much they can actually do because it's one guy, and whatever
Right.
he needs to do to vote on. I mean, every vote to reopen the government, John Fetterman's voted for it, Angus King from Maine, and Catherine Cortez Masto from Nevada reading her constituents, which is fine. We there's a cushion there for Democrats to let
Absolutely.
people do
They
this,
have a huge cushion on this
and
one.
yeah, so they put themselves in the position, and even the Ossops of the world are saying this needs to be taken care of, this healthcare stuff quickly, because people's going to get these notices that their premiums are going up in a couple of weeks. We can't wait to reopen the government and deal with this before Thanksgiving.
I think one other thing that I don't think I fully considered is that I first of all I am really genuinely shocked that Republicans are not pushing legislation in the Senate that puts Democrats in a tough position, right? They should be passing legislation in the House to pay the military to reopen
Yeah.
DHS, and so they can use that to accuse them of being soft on the border, right? That they should be, and they're not doing it, and it's very surprising to me. The other thing I'll say is that I think that I didn't know how this was going to end, but I see increasing evidence that Republicans are very, very concerned that this healthcare issue is going to hurt them. And one of my big issues that I made before the shutdown was that look, if Democrats win, their issue is we want to extend the Obamacare subsidies, right? So keep healthcare costs low. Now that is a short term win, and a long-term loss because look, Democrats are just better off those premiums go up. There's no question
Oh
about it.
God, yeah. That's the irony. We are fighting to save them from
Save them
themselves.
politically. But I
Yeah.
gotta say that this,
Did
what
you
I
see Amy Klobuchar had a map of where the people with the subsidies are this morning? It's all red places.
yeah, yeah, it's crazy. But I think what's interesting is that what's happened for Democrats is first of all, they have been unified. Like you mentioned the three senators who've gone to vote for this, but generally speaking, Democrats have been unified and they've been very, very disciplined on their messaging, which has been healthcare, healthcare, and more healthcare. That's what they've been talking about. So that's really effective. But I think it's also a case that this has energized Democrats. I think even even if they win and the Obamacare subsidies are extended, which I think is what how this ends up finished out and ends up, which with that compromise. It's a long-term political loss because those premiums will not go up, which will not hurt Republicans. I think in the near term, it really is a shot in the arm to the Democratic Party, and I think it's something that will unify the coalition. Well, first of all, for Schumer and Jeffries, I think it will consolidate support behind them at least in the near term. And I think it's from a standpoint of coalition management. This shutdown has been, I think, a net positive so far for Democrats, and can certainly end up that way, even if they end up with a compromise on a that ends up benefiting Republicans in the long term.
I think there's two or three pieces of this as to why you're right. The first is it is a nice issue that unifies the left and liberals. And increasingly there are a lot of lines dividing those two populations
Yes.
who Democrats need. And this is an issue where we all support more, affordable health care. We're all aghast at a lot of what Trump's doing and looking for ways to fight. And this is a way to fight for something concrete that's a
Yeah.
bread and butter issue. And I think that that really helps. I sent you a quote from a political article right before we started from apparently from the DNC autopsy that they're not going to release for like another 6 weeks, but they started briefing people on, which is moronic and par for the course for the DNC because once you brief people on something, it's going to leak in
It's
like
gonna
five
leak.
minutes anyway. But basically they said, we weren't talking about the issues people care about, the bread and butter issues. And so I started thinking about, so you said, that's not true at all. And you're right. Kamala Harris was talking about elder care and the aging boomer population, which more people need to talk about, and the need to help people with that. She was talking about housing. But I started thinking, so, okay, if Michael's right, and she was talking about this, and this is the perception, and they're getting this from their polling, they're getting this from their focus groups. Why is that the perception? And the perception is the last time we did a really good job of branding ourselves on an issue was Obamacare. It was we are for
Not
more
initially.
affordable. Well,
Not
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 initially, but
initially.
I'm talking about the general premise of Democrats are for more affordable healthcare. Period. That's our brand that people understand. Okay, when it comes to some of this other stuff, we have not hit on a pithy, simple message that people like that actually penetrates for the average voter.
Okay. Wait, I gotta cut in here because this actually gets something that we talked about a lot. Look, Obamacare didn't help Democrats until Republicans tried to get rid of it, and that's
Right.
a fact.
It
And
goaded them into being idiots.
but it speaks something larger that there's a lot of political science literature on this that points out that voters rarely give politicians credit for things that they do. They are much more energized by politicians wanting to take things away from them. And so I think what you see
Yeah.
in Obamacare is a good example of how Democrats you know, think that if they just pass the right laws, that they'll build political support. It doesn't work that way. I mean, look, didn't help Joe Biden or obviously Kamala Harris in 2024. I mean, Joe Biden did a lot of what he was going to do when he ran for president. It didn't make a goddamn bit of difference on election day in 2024. But to step back on this autopsy issue, and Greg Sargent has dug in on this one, and I've looked a little bit at this as well. But if you look at the ads that Harris ran in the swing states, they were overwhelmingly focused on economic issues, on bread and butter, economic populist issues. And as I love to point out, Kamala Harris ran she overperformed in the swing states. She lost swing states by like around 2 or 3 points. There was, and I think there's a 2 or 3 point shift or something. When nationally there was like a 6 point shift. She underperformed really in states that were not really contested, and she did relatively well compared to the rest of the country in places where she competed the most, which was the swing states. So I think that you know And if you look at the ads she ran, overwhelmingly focused on economic issues. This argument I don't understand the argument at all. The idea that she focused on abortion and democracy is just simply not true. Go look at her DNC speech. We read it recently. It's all focused on economic issues. It's all focused on very populist economic attacks against Republicans and against Republicans for siding with billionaires, right? The classic Democratic class warfare message. So I don't understand the argument. I don't think it's true. And I think it speaks something larger that you know, you in this day and age, negative polarization is what drives voter decision making. And so back to my point about Obamacare. People weren't going to vote for Democrats if they passed Obamacare. They were going to vote for them if they fear Republicans would take it away. And I just think that is a very important lesson for Democrats. If you want to beat Donald Trump, you can talk about what you want to do, fine, but focus on things he wants to take away from you, things he's going to hurt you with. That is what plays.
So you've raised like three issues. First, I think Obamacare is actually a sandwich in terms of how it helps or hurts the parties. It helped
Okay.
Obama in 2008 because I think that part of what hurt Harris is she did not have a signature issue that people could say she is going to do this for us. It was a laundry list of
Yeah.
policy positions. And I do think that having a signature branding, Bill Clinton ran on healthcare. That was his biggest, issue in
Yeah, but Bill
1992.
Clinton running as the president with a 31% approval rating and in the
He
midst
did.
of a recession.
I think that you have to have both things. You have to relentlessly hammer the other side, and you have to also say to people, we are going to fight for you. We are going to make your life better and easier. And it can't be a bun. I think I'm coming around to the idea that part of what hurts Democrats is we're trying to do too much. You look at Joe Biden's first, Build Back Better proposal. They were trying to do like 20 billion things for 3 years each to get it in under the cap as opposed to one signature initiative.
But that's because you've got 2 years to basically
No,
get your
I
agenda
agree.
through, and
But
you got to take advantage of the opportunity.
I agree with that, but I'm coming around to thinking that first of all, it's more achievable and sustainable to pick one or two signature initiatives and get them enacted. And I'll tell you, I also think, Michael, it's more compassionate. And the reason I say that is that it gives people some permanency. Some of this nonsense of passing everything for 2 or 3 years so that you can, and here I'm just talking about good governance, not the politics of it, but it passes them for 2 or 3 years. People then who are benefiting from these programs live in a perpetual state of limbo because they never know, is this going to get caught up in the next war and not extended, which is what's happening with these
But
subsidies.
that is a much more recent development in American politics. You would agree that's the way things been in the past. Something was passed and it became law, and nobody tried to repeal it. The Obamacare thing is sort of sui generis.
Yeah, I think that that's true. And I'll tell you why. It's because it's the first really big initiative that happened, with the exception, well, not even tax cuts. It's the first really big initiative that I can think of that was done completely on a partisan basis. The advantage of bipartisanship, and this is why Obama and the Senate Democrats initially sought bipartisanship and did everything they possibly could. To be clear, I'm not criticizing Obama on this.
No,
I'm saying that this was the Republicans and polarization. That when you have something that's bipartisan, it's much more stable. Like to go to
absolutely.
find things that were not bipartisan, you have to go back to the New Deal. And by the time Eisenhower came into power, those things had been in place a long time, and people liked them. And opposing them would have been politically suicidal. But like you look at the LBJ big things, Medicare, Medicaid, these kinds of programs, they were done on a bipartisan basis. Reagan's
Agreed. Agreed.
tax reform in '86, immigration reform, those were bipartisan. Even Reagan's tax cuts passed because of a bunch of Democrats.
But look what's happened. Look, Biden's infrastructure bill. I mean, which was bipartisan. Trump is trying to undo, big chunks of that, and
Well,
is
okay,
taking.
so
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
there's two issues that I think are killing Democrats on people benefiting them. And you're right about the political science literature, by the way. That it's absolutely true that the most powerful motivator in politics is when somebody tries to take something away from you.
Exactly.
Okay, that is absolutely the case. But there's also two other factors. I keep flashing back constantly to these absolutely infuriating stories I saw in the weeks before the election in local Philadelphia newspapers, where Democratic canvassers would go out and they knock on doors in impoverished neighborhoods, and mostly voters of color, and they'd hear, "Well, I kind of like that Trump guy." Well, why do you like that Trump guy? Well, he sent me a check. Donald Trump, the master of branding, who understands you put your name on everything, put his name on people's stimulus checks, and it disgusts me, Michael, but it worked. They saw
But
that it's
it
coming
wait a
from
minute.
him.
Wait a minute. It didn't work in 2020. He lost by 7 million votes. I mean,
You're right.
to me, that argument is the classic example of how voters pick a candidate they like and then backfill the reasons why they like them.
The first being that the margin was narrower. Um, in some of these places, and like Wisconsin was what 20,000 votes, 30,000 votes, something like it was really narrow.
Yeah.
But secondly, I think it fed this perception of things were like he did stuff for us economically, and this other guy didn't, and Biden made things worse. That people were saying, in 2020 they were voting on there's chaos. COVID is out there. The economy's broken down. This has been exhausting for 4 years of chaos, and the stimulus checks weren't enough to offset that. But when juxtaposed against 4 years of Joe Biden's administration and prices rising and things like that, I think it did matter at the margin. Again, for nothing that I'm arguing, oh, Trump won because of this. Is it this affected a huge number of voters? None of this would have mattered in the old days when you had elections decided by clear, convincing
Majorities, right.
margins. It's only because everything is so damn narrow
Well, so
that
this,
this stuff
yes,
matters.
100%. And this gets to my grand theory of American politics, which is that we are a 50-50 country, very near, with a slight, very, very slight Democratic lean. And I say that because Democrats have won the popular vote in 7 of the last 9 presidential elections. A very slight Democratic lean, but the electoral map and Senate map and the House map is basically biased against Democrats for a variety of reasons we could talk about if you want. But that is sort of the case. But I think what happens is you have these very close elections in which a very small but powerful constituency of swing voters ends up moving toward one candidate, usually as a vote against another candidate, against the incumbent party, and that those small and, by the way, least informed voters by far are the ones who decide elections. And I just
Yeah.
think that if you look at the 7 swing states, all went 2016, they all went to Trump. 2020, they all went to Biden. 2024, they all went to Trump. And I think you're talking about a very small subset of the electorate. I mean, I'm not going to be too pejorative, but not the necessarily the brightest people when it comes to understanding politics and understanding
Well,
government.
let's call them not the most informed. They're not tuned in.
Okay, fine. They're not.
We'll be
Okay, you
nice.
know what? Let's be nice
Let's
about
be
it.
nice.
Let's be nice. We'll be nice today. Let's say the least informed, and that those people are the ones who ultimately are deciding in our elections. I mean, that I think is the real. And I think, by the way, if I look at what happened the last 3 election cycles, my basic take on this is that 2 things decided this election. One is that Trump was able to motivate a small but persistent group of voters who were only Trump voters, who only came out for Trump. And you see this in places like Pennsylvania. You saw this in 2024 with, Democrats winning 4 Senate races that Trump won those races. In some cases, Harris getting more votes than Senate candidates, like in Michigan and Nevada, but still losing while the Democratic Senate candidate won. And I think that what I call the female tax, and I think I hate to say it because it makes me unhappy, but I just think that in 2016 and 2024, and there's a lot of data on this, Democrats were taxed. They lost male voters because they nominated women, and that those 2 factors, which again along the margins, we're talking about very narrow shifts in the electorate. But those 2 factors probably was what cost Democrats the White House in 2016 and 2024.
I largely agree, but you've raised like 4 little points that I want to make, that are just caveating
All right,
things
be
a
quick
little
because we
bit.
got a lot to talk
I'm going
about
to do
today.
this very quickly. The first being, I think you're right about the state of the electorate, but it's possible, certainly not definite, that 2024 marked the beginning of a change. I wrote a column on this in December where 2024 could easily be 2004, where Democrats bounce back really quickly, or it could be 1968, where the tectonic plates of politics are moving. I tend to lean more towards the former, that this is 2004. The Democrats will bounce back, but I did. Whereas I knew you were right before 2024. The Democrats had consistently won the popular vote and were going to consistently win the popular vote. Now I think it's a little bit more of an open question because we just don't know what comes next. It's very hard to make judgments on election cycle.
That's
And
that last point is crucial. And what makes me crazy about so much of the analysis I see right now is that so many people are making their judgments based on one election. And, if it's like, I saw this, we got into a little thing on Twitter about this. Sahil Kapoor is a reporter for NBC, was like, Democrats don't know how to communicate. They're not effective. And when people are good at it, they stand out. I'm like, that is bullshit. I mean, I look at every swing state. I look at Josh Shapiro. I look at JB state, but I look at Melissa Slotkin, at Gretchen Whitmer, at both the Nevada senators, at what's it called? Let me think of other ones. Pete Buttigieg, who's not running for office, but whatever. The point is, Democrats are very good at this, and they were very good at it in 2020 when they won a goddamn governing trifecta that no one wants to talk about, or 2022 when they won an election people thought they were going to lose. They picked up a seat in the Senate. So I just think that people have gotten this weird. And I think there's a was motivating this is people have a larger ideological agenda. But I think that talking about 2024 in a vacuum, ignoring what happened in 2020 and 2022, and ignoring the fact that every incumbent party in the world lost voter share in 2024, I just think that people are drawing too big a conclusions of what happened in that election. And that
I,
I'm gonna use a pivot. Okay, go ahead quickly. I want to go pivot point there.
well, I no, I want to respond to that. I think that where that perception comes from is two places. The first is that outside of Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, Democrats have decades of nominating not particularly great communicators to run for the White House. Michael Dukakis, John Kerry.
Two Democratic two-term presidents outside of them.
But wait a second. Wait a second. John Kerry, Michael Dukakis, Hillary Clinton,
Joe Biden, who
Kamala Harris.
won by 7
Right,
million
right,
votes in
right.
2020.
But like
Come on.
what I'm saying to you is I think perceptions are formed over time and people get frustrated like John Kerry being terrible. And that shaped a lot of people's perceptions. The other thing is I do think that there's something I'm not as convinced that Democratic like admin and strategists are as good at messaging as Republicans, especially negative messaging that works. I think that our candidates we have plenty of good communicators like you're talking about. But I'm trying to think about the last time I saw a really great, really devastating, shape the entire election Democratic ad.
Because those things are myths. They don't really, there's no ad ever shapes an election. I mean, and
Mm.
by the way, I want to say one thing about John Kerry in 2004. Okay, let me say this right now. He ran an excellent campaign, and he lost by the narrowest margin to lose to an incumbent president since 1916. Okay, that's in 88 years. Okay, and he did that because he ran a better fall campaign than Bush. That was a very difficult campaign to win. You had a relatively popular president that found 50%. You had the economy was in relatively good shape, and you had and the war had not people not turned against the Iraq War, and Kerry almost beat him. People knock on John Kerry. He ran a good campaign in 2024.
Okay, my disagreement with that. The day I knew
So
John,
I'll give you Al Gore sucked, but John Kerry was good.
the day I knew John Kerry was going to lose, I was a sophomore. No, I was a junior in college, and they ship us off to Temple for a 8 a.m. Friday morning event with John Kerry, which, if you know anything about college students, for those of you watching out there, is not our favorite time of day. And then we come back to Penn. He's coming to campus to do a huge outdoor rally, Kerry. And again, we're standing under the baking sun. This is like September. And this was actually the second time I met Joe Biden. Is the end point of this story. But
Okay,
Biden opens for John Kerry. I think the openers are like Ed Rendell, who was then the governor of Pennsylvania, and um, uh, Joe Biden. And I walked away from that rally thinking this guy's going to lose because Biden and Rendell were both so much more charismatic, so much better at connecting. This guy is boring. He's stiff. He doesn't work. And then the end of the story, the fun part is my friends and I had this Friday afternoon class. The professor only taught on Friday afternoon because she wanted the best, most engaged students. We
sure,
decided we're going to get some burgers and some beers before we go to class because it's been a long day already.
sure,
And we're sitting outside at a restaurant, and Joe Biden comes strolling down this little street with his jacket slung over his shoulder, his aviators on, and he pulls up to us with like this big grin on his face, says, can I ask you guys a question? We're like, sure, Senator. Because we're probably wearing like Kerry shirts and stuff. And he's like, so is this place the reason my kids didn't use those expensive meal plans I paid for? And we're just cracking up. He's got us eating out of his hand, have a nice conversation. But like that was the day where I was like, you know what? Kerry just doesn't have the charisma. He's not Bill Clinton.
Look, I
Um,
I think all of that is overrated in politics. I think Joe Biden barely campaigned in 2020. He wasn't out on the stump because of COVID. I don't think anyone would argue was a great orator, a great communicator. Maybe he used to be, but he certainly wasn't by the time he ran for president in 2020. He won by 7 million votes. And I think if you watch like Donald Trump's absolute dumpster fire of a convention speech of the RNC in 2024 that was so hideous and so awful, it didn't
oh
matter.
God, yeah.
He's a
No.
terrible communicator also. But it doesn't matter. I don't think that's, I think that's genuinely overrated. But I want to talk about candidate quality and candidates in general because we need to talk about two races that are coming up: the New Jersey governor's race, Virginia governor's race. It does seem the Virginia governor's race is not going to be all that close. First of all, you have a Republican incumbent, so there's going to be a backlash against that, and that you're seeing that play out a little bit. You also have an absolutely dreadful Republican candidate, Winsome.
Dreadful.
What's her name? Winsome
Sears Earl or Earl
Sears.
Sears.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a hyphen in there
yeah. I don't
somewhere.
know. I'm forgetting her
She's the
name.
lieutenant governor. She's your classic, looks fantastic on paper. Black female veteran, who opens her mouth and you're like, wow, that woman's batshit insane.
She's batshit insane. And I'm guessing she's going to lose by double digits in that race. Now, the interesting race is New Jersey. And I want to just step back on this just to remind people this is an interesting data point that I did not know until recently, that no party has won 3 governor's elections, gubernatorial elections, by the way, a word that I love, gubernatorial. No one's won 3 in a row since 1960. It's been more than 6 decades since that's happened. Now, Democrats, Phil Murphy, the incumbent governor, he won 2 terms. This now you have Mickey Sherrill running against Jack Ciattarelli. The race is tight, but if you look at every single public opinion poll, Sherrill is ahead. There have been some recent polls. There was one poll about a month ago or maybe 2 weeks ago, I think, that showed Ciattarelli, the Republican, up by a point. But generally speaking, she has been ahead. I think this is an interesting election that I've heard mixed things about Sherrill on the campaign stump. But my sense of this is that New Jersey is a blue state. It is a state in which Democrats have done well for, I don't know, 20 or 30 years now. And there is a significant anti-Trump mood in the electorate. And so I suspect she's going to win. But I do think this race is going to be a lot closer to people had expected because of, this historical, disinclination of New Jersey voters to pick a party 3 elections in a row for a governor's race.
I think that first of all, Democrats have a trifecta in Trenton. They control the state government,
Right.
and people are no happier with the state government than the federal government. So
Right.
that is
Right.
definitely cutting against them. I think Cheryl actually is another good example of someone who looks great on paper. She's a Navy fighter pilot. She's a mother of 4. She's moderate and sensible. She hasn't been good on the stump. And first of all, she's done the one thing the candidates can't do communication wise, which is she's made some gaffes. She said some things that lent themselves beautifully to Republican ads. And I think that's hurt a little bit, but she's also been very cautious, Michael. She's also been kind of more on script and on message and not really, doesn't really have a big agenda that people are seeing. She reminds me, I said this about Kamala Harris after 2024. She was a great Obama era candidate, which is to say, the thing about Barack Obama is he was ruthlessly on message, almost always. He came, there was a script and he read it and he read it well and it worked. Okay, Donald Trump has kind of scrambled that, and I actually don't think it's him. I actually think it's social media. I think it's broader societal changes. But people want someone who comes off as real. And I think that if you're cautious and you're on script, that is a little bit less appealing than it used to be. Now, that being said, and let's be honest, New Jersey governor's race in 2021 was only a 3-point race. It was
3-point
real
race.
close.
People forget that.
Phil Murphy is not a popular incumbent governor. And then, Trump only lost by 6 in New Jersey. New Jersey is not that is a place where it seems like Democrats have more problems, and there's a lot of theories. Some of this, I think, is about the New York media market and things happening in New York, in New York City, and perceptions that the northern half of New Jersey is in that New York media market, because I don't think they saw the same drop off in the southern half, the part that is Philadelphia suburbs. I
Right.
think a lot of where they took the hit was in northern Jersey. So it makes me think that some of this is about the New York media market because we've seen New York move towards Republicans in the last few cycles as well.
Well, see, I
They
think
they won the House in 2022 because of New York, Michael.
that is true. They won a bunch of House seats in 2022 because Democrats fucked up redistricting. That is true. But I think the New Jersey thing. Then again, they won more seats. They flipped more seats in any state in New York than any other state in the country in 2024, a year in which supposedly
Yeah.
Trump made inroads in the Democratic Party. I mean, same in California. New York and California were the two states that, I mean, granted, they had the most congressmen, and congresswomen, but they had the most flips. So I think this is a little bit overstated, and I do think that, like, yes, Trump lost by 6 points in Jersey. I don't know how much 2024. I don't want you to read into that. I mean, if you look at across blue states, a lot of Democrats stayed home. They thought the election wasn't going to be that close. Maybe they weren't that enamored with Harris. I don't get the impression that I think it's a one-off, and I wouldn't take it all that serious. I don't know what Biden did in 2020. I think he won by double digits in New Jersey. I
He
don't
did.
think it matters all that much. And the end of the day, especially if Cheryl wins, and I would assume she probably does because it's a blue state and because there's anti-Trump animus in the electorate. Um, that's a bad sign for Republicans, right? Because
Yeah.
this is a place where they should be. I mean, I think they have a relatively good candidate in Jack Ciattarelli, which is unusual for
Well,
them. He's
I
okay.
think he's run a relatively good campaign, but I think anytime you're running for an office for the third time and haven't won, that
It's a
limits how
problem.
much
It's a
I'm
problem.
willing to credit you for being a good candidate.
Which I think gets to a larger point that Republicans. This is a thing you and I've argued about a lot. Republicans have a candidate quality problem, right?
Yeah,
I made this stat mentioned this last time that 70% of swing state senators are Democrats. 70% of governors uh, are Democrats, and some of that is I think because Democrats nominate good candidates, and they're probably more in touch with the electorate. But it's also Republicans nominate terrible
terrible
candidates.
candidates. Yeah.
I mean, in Pennsylvania, look, Josh Freer was going to win no matter what, but he won by double digits against Mastriani. Fetterman won in 2022, in part, I think, because Dr. Oz was a bad candidate. You look at Georgia, in which Republicans won every statewide election in 22 except for the Senate race because Herschel Walker was a terrible candidate. You look at Carrie Lake, by the way, good communicator, Carrie Lake, lost to a terrible communicator in Katie Hobbs, governor's race. Then she lost 2 years later to Ruben Gallego, who's a better communicator. But my point is, like, they have a tendency to nominate bad candidates. You're seeing that in Virginia right now. And I think in New Jersey, they haven't nominated a dreadful candidate, which I think is what helps make them competitive in that race. And I think that Cheryl may not be the best candidate. I don't. But is she that much better than Spangberger in Virginia, who's going to win by double digits?
No,
I don't
they're
know.
very similar. Both of
They're very
them
similar.
are not full of a lot of charisma. Both have national security backgrounds. Both have moderate profiles and are sensible. And when you listen to them, you're like, this person is sane. This person is capable. They're very good friends. They were both went to the House in 2018. I think that there's one differentiating factor, which is Cheryl's district got redistricted after 2020.
Yeah.
And 2020 was a blue year, especially in a place like New Jersey, and then her district got redistricted. So she really only ran like one hard race,
But
whereas
she did flip that seat in 2018.
she did it, but it was an open seat, I believe, and she only ran one hard race, whereas Spanberger had to keep running hard races in
Yes.
Virginia, and so I think her skills may be a little bit sharper. Although she just had to clean something up with a television interview that she didn't handle particularly well. Um, but I think that you're right. I think, look, first of all, I think that we may be hitting an inflection point in politics, or we may have already gotten there. Um, it used to be the candidate quality really, really, really mattered. That you could win anywhere if you ran the right candidate. And I think the first time I realized that had something had really changed was 2016 when Jason Kander ran the perfect campaign in the Missouri
So
Senate race, and
so
Roy
awesome.
Blunt ran a terrible campaign. He was sort of, I think, ambivalent about running again, ran but didn't do. Really ran a poor campaign and still won by 3 points because Trump had exploded the margin, and there just weren't enough crossover voters left to deliver the state. And the reason I raised this issue is I saw a poll not that long ago. Doug Mastriano is flirting with running again, which Pennsylvania Democrats would be thrilled with. But
Thrilled.
the establishment choice for the Republican Party of Pennsylvania is Stacey Garrity, who is the state treasurer, and I'm convinced she won in 2020 because she was a woman after the Me Too cycles, and that it helped her, and she then I think actually got more votes than any other candidate in Pennsylvania in 2024. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that this poll I saw had Shapiro beating Garrity by a whopping one more point than he would beat Mastriano by, which is to say that she's not a bad candidate. I don't think she's a great candidate, but she's not a bad candidate, and he's a disaster dumpster fire of a candidate. And the
Mastriano,
difference is
not
only, yeah,
Shapiro. Mastriano.
Mastriano. And the difference in the poll was 1 point, which is to say that we are so hardened and polarized. And I was actually telling a reporter about this yesterday. I talked to, didn't get into the story, but I was talking to a reporter about this Jay Jones thing in Virginia. For those who've never heard of this guy, because I hadn't until Friday, he's the Democratic candidate for Attorney General in Virginia. And it came out, National Review got a good scoop um, last week that he had texted with a Republican state legislator um, a few years ago. It was apparently some sort of like attempt to be like mimicking something from The Office, the television
Yeah.
show. But he was
Yeah.
talking, basically joking about watching the assassination of the Republican State House Speaker. And joking around about him dying and his family and his kids and all this stuff. And one thing I said to this reporter is, I'm not sure that this means that this guy loses. Pre-Trump, this would have been the end of his campaign. The
Agreed.
Republican Attorney General would have been renominated. But I always flash back to something that Rush Limbaugh said, of all people, Michael, summer 2016, and I have this in my book. Rush Limbaugh, Donald Trump said one of the many awful things he said that summer, or summer 2015. This is the
Okay.
McCain, Megyn Kelly summer.
Right.
Okay. And Russ came on and said, guys, I don't know what's going to happen. And the reason I don't know what's going to happen is every time that the drive-bys, that's what he called the mainstream media, the drive-by media, is as though they were shooting something. The drive-bys and the Democrats, they tell a politician to go away, and they can't, say cancel didn't exist as a word then. But they tell
Right.
them to go away. People tuck their tail and run away. And this guy, he's fighting back. He's saying, no, 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 it's up to you, my listeners, to make this decision. And oh, it's going to happen because no one's ever done that before. And I think Rush was right that
Well, yeah, but isn't Trump a little sui generis?
he is sui generis, but like the point being that Trump said basically Trump gambled that we were polarized enough that he could say just the most honest thing the man ever said was he said I could go out and shoot somebody in the
Yes.
middle of Fifth Avenue and they wouldn't leave me. And he kind of recognized that we had
But
reached a point of polarization.
but wait. How many Republicans have said batshit crazy things? Can't
Oh,
relate this, by the
tons
way.
and tons
And
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 tons and
and
tons of
Herschel
them.
Walker and doomed their candidacy as a result. I think it's really hard to draw conclusions about politics based on Trump because operates in this netherworld where he can say anything and his supporters won't be upset about it.
Okay.
And
Oh, you're making a great point. I'm going to make a theory up on the fly here. Okay.
here we go. Oh,
You-
I love
You're
it.
you're you're
I'm a
making a
theory. Bring it.
tremendous point, which is I think you can get away with a gaffe now, especially if it's not a contemporary gaffe. It's something you said in the past. Um, I don't think you can get away with a constant barrage of this person is unqualified, this person says batshit insane things. I think that there's a difference now between, hey, this person went on TV and stuck their foot in their mouth, and Herschel Walker, who it was a constant thing,
True.
parade of, he said
True.
bizarre things. He threatened people in his, his wife or family. His own son is like ripping the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Like if you basically have a constant parade of that, yeah, you're not going to overcome that because people are going to say, okay, this person's insane. If it's like an isolated gap or one of several isolated gaps, I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure that Todd legitimate rape Aiken would
I
have
was gonna
lost
go
today.
there. So oh my God, I literally was gonna make that exact statement to
Or,
you.
or Richard or
Ask you.
Richard Murdoch. You brought Murdoch up last
In,
year. And the
in
fun fact,
Indiana.
I interviewed that guy for my book. He was an interesting interview, but another one who made some comment about rape and pregnancy and abortion that cost him a
Yeah.
race in 2012 in abortion. And
Yeah.
I think post Trump, those guys would have won because their states were red enough and that there just weren't enough split
I,
ticket splitters left.
I kind of agree with you. I actually think if Aiken ran today and what happened, I think he probably would still win, although it'd be a closer race. I just think that, closer race than if with Josh Hawley running. I do think you make a good point that it's hard. You can get away because of the nature of polarization now. You can get away with that kind of stuff. And here's interesting, another one to consider, and that is Katie Porter, who's running for the governor's nomination.
I hate to admit that I'm wrong, Michael, but I'm gonna have to. I really liked her at one
Oh,
point.
I liked her too. And then I heard from a number of people in California, one in particular, who basically was like, there's a lot of skeletons in the closet on this one. And that she is abusive to her staff, that she goes to a lot of campaign managers. And I think I mean, if you haven't seen it yet, there's a clip of her being interviewed by a investigative reporter, and she has what I would describe as a meltdown. I mean, she doesn't like the questions being asked. She tries to cut the interview short. She's rude. She's condescending. But here's the thing. She made this point of saying, this reporter asked her, how are you going to win over Trump voters? And she says, I don't need Trump voters. And she's right. If she wins the
Shocker.
Democratic nomination for governor, Democratic nomination, she will become the next governor of California.
Well,
I don't care how much of a jerk she is. She's not going to lose that governor's race.
we should be clear that California has a top two system. That is
Right.
not like each party nominates someone.
Right.
But as long
Right.
as as long as it's her versus a Republican, she will win.
She will win. I have no doubt in my mind because of the nature of how partisan elections have become. And I just can't. And look, in California, Republicans have won a statewide race, I don't know, easily 20 years. And by the way, what's funny about
Well,
this is that
when was Schwarzenegger last reelected? Would have been like oh,
uh, oh six
oh
maybe.
06. Yeah.
I think
I think
06.
it was either oh 06 or I don't remember. He was elected in a recall, so I don't know if he then got two terms and was
No,
like
he won.
reelected
No, he was
10.
reelected. He was reelected.
Right, right, but I don't know if it was 6 and 10 were his two
No, it
full
was two and
terms.
it was. I think it was 2 and 6 or four
Okay.
and six or something.
But like he's the
Something like that.
last guy I think who won at least a Senate or governor's race. And they haven't won a Senate race there since Pete Wilson in 96 got reelected or 86. 86.
By the way, I just think it's sort of funny. All these pundit bros who are like, "Oh, we have to run in red states to expand the map." No Republicans ever say that about blue states. No Republican ever says we need to win in California because they know that 20 years of losses means they're not going to win there. And I just think like it's
But
funny about how these.
that's the advantage you talked about. They have a built-in advantage of we represent a bunch of these places that
I mean,
19th century Republicans.
it's a narrow advantage. They only won the Senate last year. I mean, it's a very narrow advantage that they have in the Senate. They need to expand their map too.
I think that that's true to some extent, but the map has been moving towards them as Democrats became non-competitive in a lot of places they used to win. I think that at this point, what happened was, I think if you go back 10, 15 years, the Senate map was such the Democrats had a high ceiling and Republicans had a medium ceiling and a pretty high floor. Now I think it's flipped, which is to say that you point out correctly, and you're right that the Democrats have won all the swing states, but those are also places Republicans can win. And if Republicans won a bunch more of those swing states, they have a ceiling that could approach 60 votes. Democrats' ceiling right now is 51 or 52.
I mean, that's
Um,
fair. That is a fair point. Their ceiling is lower. But I also think, at the same time, like they have consistently shown an ability to win in those swing states in ways that Republicans have not been able to. They are holding on to a Senate seat in Maine that they probably shouldn't be. They probably should be a Democratic seat. They seem very likely, or not likely, that's too much. They seem like there's a reasonable chance they will lose the Senate seat in North Carolina. So let's just say that in Maine and North Carolina flips, then you're at 51-49. That's a pretty narrow divide, which Democrats need to pick up basically one seat in 28 plus the White House to basically control the Senate. So all I'm saying is like Republicans, you know, you cannot feel comfortable if you're a Republican with the margin that they have. And look, they've got another guy, Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, who probably, if he faced up against a better candidate in 2022, probably would have lost.
and
So,
2016 and
and
2010
well, he beat Feingold in 2010, I think, right?
and
He knocked him up.
2016. Yeah, yeah.
And then look, I
Feingold
mean,
is
Yeah, I'm
He,
just saying that like they don't have a lot of. I mean, even Dave McCormick. How confident are you, Dave McCormick, are you that you're going? I mean, I
well,
guess if you're
President Shapiro is going to make him his top target in 2030 in his own backyard and say, "I'm getting rid of this guy." So, um,
all right, that's we should talk about. That's a good segue. So, before I want to talk about the Spear Newsom thing, but before we get there, well, let's talk about this. We've had this conversation, you and I, a little bit back and forth, that I think there's a really interesting dynamic taking place in the Democratic Party right now, as far as the sort of shadow presidential campaigns. And you've seen the two, I think, front runners is too broad of a term, but let's just say the two leading
yeah,
candidates at this point, yeah, look like Newsom and in California and Shapiro. And the Newsom thing is interesting because I think beginning of the year he was playing this like triangulation card, trying to be the centrist,
did a
and
podcast with Charlie Kirk
did
and Steve
and Steve
Bannon.
Bannon exactly. He sort of took a shot at trans athletes, and I think it hurt him politically. And then we have this redistricting issue comes about, and he goes all out and basically pushes this resolution, which looks like it's going to pass, to what possibly flip 5 Republican seats for the Democrats. He has gone on social media and he's ruthlessly mocking Donald Trump. And I think his fortunes have completely shifted because he looks like a fighter. He looks like the guy who's going to take on the Republicans. Meanwhile, Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania is like Mr. Technocrat. I mean, I follow him on Twitter. It's hilarious. Like, look at all the things that I'm doing. Look at all the new initiatives and new businesses that are coming to Pennsylvania. And, not really taking pot shots at Trump, but when he does, sort of doing sort of high-minded pot shots at him. And yet, as you pointed out to me last week, his polling is off the charts in Pennsylvania. Was he at
And
60% right now?
he's at 60%. And the interesting thing about that, I think it was a Quinnipiac poll, had him up 11 points on JD Vance in a 2028 horse race. And the other thing is he leans into his faith a lot, which
Yes.
is interesting. I know it's created issues for him because he's a supporter of Israel, and with the Democratic base, that's not the most popular positions at the moment. But like that, he and his wife were posting
But
pictures of their sukkah
let's
being
clarify though.
built.
He is a supporter of Israel. He's not a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu. He
No,
is more harshly attacking Netanyahu than pretty much any other leading Democrat.
right.
And he is being attacked because he's Jewish.
Yeah,
That is why he's
absolutely.
being attacked.
And,
And there,
and I hate to say it, but that's his biggest barrier in 2028 is overcoming the anti-Semitism that pervades some parts of the activist base
some
of
parts, a
some.
significant part of the activist left.
Okay, I was trying to actually be cautious there, but you're that's how I feel too. That it's a significant part of the activist left, especially the young activist left.
Yes.
But here's the thing with Shapiro. Um, the reason I still think that his lane of the party wins in 2028, whether it's him, whether it's Ruben Gallego, who has a very different personality, but is also a pretty charismatic, pretty well liked swing state politician, is that when push comes to shove, they're going to say to Newsom or to voters, "You've hated the last 4 years, haven't you? If you nominate him, you nominate Newsom, he's going to own all of these things in California that were too far to the left for most voters. He is going to put this at risk. He's going to get branded as yet another liberal. Now, you vote for me, I take the biggest swing state in America off the map.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania is going blue."
It's a
Okay.
huge point. It's a huge
Or,
point.
or Gallego will say, "I take Arizona off the map. I put one swing state," and I bet he also would argue, "I take Nevada off the map too," because there's a lot of similar characteristics between the two states. But like to me, Democratic primary voters are pragmatic. That's how they hit on Joe Biden
Absolutely.
in 2020. And I just think that they're going to be so disgusted with the state of the country, so afraid of 4 more years of Republicans, that they're going to say, we can't take the chance. We like Gavin Newsom more. We like that he's fought for us. We like that he's tough, but we can't take the chance. And especially older voters who remember John Kerry and Michael Dukakis getting caricatured because they were from Massachusetts, saying, "Look, we can't take the chance that this guy loses when we've got this other guy who's safe." Now, the key caveat to that for Shapiro is he's got to win overwhelmingly in 2026, right? Like he's trying to do the George W. Bush thing, which was George W. upset a Democratic governor in
Yeah,
1994
absolutely,
in
definitely.
Texas. People forget this because they're like, what are you talking about? It's from Texas. But he upset an incumbent Democratic
He
governor, Ann
knocked off Ann
Richards.
Richards. Yeah,
Yeah, in 1994, got some retribution because she had said of his father that was born with a silver foot in his mouth or something like that.
silver foot in his mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. And then in 1998, he went
Well,
out
I
and
actually the better line was he was born on third base and he thought he hit a
yeah,
triple.
yeah, exactly. She was a really skilled politician, and no Democrat has won in Texas
Since
since.
her.
But he then ran up a huge margin in his reelect in 1998 at a time that people didn't know that Texas was headed towards Democrats can never win here again,
Right, right.
and positioned himself as, look, I am um, the Spanish speaking son of a president, governor of a big state that was a swing state until 5 minutes ago, and I made it not a swing state, and that helped catapult him to the presidency. Shapiro's got to do the same thing. He's got to win a big reelection, and it would help if Democrats swept all the competitive House seats,
I agree.
and he
Agreed.
delivered the House back to Democrats, at a national level. That's his candidacy. The other thing to watch was Josh Shapiro, and it's going to be very interesting. The likelihood of Democrats getting a trifecta in Pennsylvania are not great. Okay, the state Senate is such that because of the way Democrats are geographically arrayed, getting a majority there is going to be tough, but I don't think it's 100% impossible in a real way.
Okay.
If he were to get that trifecta, all of a sudden that would open him up to do bolder things.
Yeah.
It would be a very
100%.
narrow trifecta. It wouldn't be a situation where he could do a lot of like leftist things, but we're talking about like permanent solutions to SEPTA's funding problem. SEPTA is our regional transit network
Right.
here that goes through perpetual crisis and just threatened to cancel like all of their like half of their routes and things like that. And like funding that and funding education, if he gets a narrow trifecta, he could do a lot of really good things and then also have I accomplished all this to run on. But the thing about Josh Shapiro that I think he gets that other politicians don't is, what is it that Americans actually care about? And it's their own lives. Where did he first gain fame as a governor? It was a critical stretch of
Yes.
I-95
I
shuts
95.
down, and he goes there and he's on the ground. He's got one of those windbreakers on or whatever it was,
The whole thing. Yeah.
the whole thing, and he gets it reopened. The original projections from like the highway experts are it's going to take 2 or 3 months, and he gets it reopened in 11 days or something like that.
Yep.
And what he understood was that's what people care about. Is my commute going to take an extra hour today?
Okay, but let me jump in here. I think I would maybe frame this a different way. I think that Gavin Newsom is running the campaign to win a Democratic nomination, and
Primary.
right
Yeah.
now
Yeah, that's right.
he is, I think, probably, and again it's 3 years away, so it's hard to say he's leading, but he's in a good position. Josh Shapiro is running for president,
Yeah,
not
that's
for Democratic
exactly right.
nomination, and I think, but look, ultimately to win the Democratic nomination, and I have made this point over and over again, but it always has to be remembered. The key to winning the Democratic nomination is winning the support of Black voters, and it
Yeah,
means winning in South Carolina, which, by the way, is going to be the first primary in the next
maybe.
20. Well, we'll see. I mean, as of now, it is.
Yeah.
Um, so the question is, Ken Shapiro, who will do better with Black voters? Now, it's also a question of who else is going to run. And you mentioned Gallego. I hadn't really thought about Gallego as a candidate, but yes, he would be a very viable candidate.
I actually think he'd be very good. I actually think he doesn't run because he is he's a baby and a toddler, I think.
Yes.
And he's sort of kind of made some hints at that of like the timing.
Timing is
Um,
rough for him. There's no
yeah,
question about it. I think the other thing to consider, the other person is, well, Gretchen Whitmer was somebody that people had talked about, but she has just completely gone off the radar screen. I think it's pretty clear she's not running. I mean, if she is running president, she's going about it in a very odd way. I do not. I think the more likely Michigan candidate for president would be Alyssa Slotkin. Although I don't know if she's ready to run in 20. I think she may need a re-election first, and she's pretty young. She's in her
Oh,
40s.
let me make another point. You talked about the female tax. I think someone as savvy as Slotkin may look at things and say, I need to wait another cycle or two
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
the right now I don't think Democrats are ready to nominate a third woman in 4 cycles after 2 of them lost.
I Yes, I agree. And I think if you're slacking, you're better off waiting. Look, she'll have only been in the Senate for 4 years. No, yeah, 4 years. So
Six.
I think it's a bit
Yeah, four. Yeah, you're right.
four
Four.
years. 4 years in 2028. I think one interesting dark horse candidate who I don't think is even going to run, but I've sort of been thinking about for a while is Raphael Warnock in Georgia.
I was about to say one of the Georgia senators runs, and the
I
reason
mean,
I
Warnock for
well,
sure.
okay, but here's the thing with Warnock. If Ossoff gets reelected, and it's no guarantee in 2026, but if
Right.
Ossoff gets reelected, he gets what I would call a free shot at the presidency, which is to say he can run without losing his seat. Warnock is in cycle in
Yeah,
2028.
that is the problem. That is
Yeah,
the problem. And I do think that is a major problem for Warnock to run. Is that if you run, you are basically giving up a Senate seat. Not that Warnock would definitely get reelected, but you'd like his chances better than anybody else in Georgia. Look, Raphael Warnock has won two statewide elections in Georgia, and it's pretty impressive what he's done. So I think Raphael is a pretty good politician,
who's
but he
I think the last Democrat to do that would have been like Zell Miller,
I think it was Bill Miller. I think it was Bill Miller, yeah, who famously endorsed George W. Bush in 2004.
and then
I
went
mean,
on TV and sounded unhinged.
yes, but effective. I think when people talk about Wes Moore in Maryland, I've seen no evidence he's seriously considering a run. I mean, I mentioned Moore and Warnock because I do think that they would be very effective with winning over black voters in South Carolina, but no guarantee. And then, of course, the other person is Kamala Harris, who I do not get the impression she's
No.
running, but I can't tell. I don't think she's going to run. Now,
And I think if she runs, she's going to get a real rude awakening that she got a lot of support in 2024 from people who would never have supported her in a primary. And were not impressed enough to say, I want to go back and do this again. The other thing to remember with Warnock that makes Warnock a really interesting, effective candidate is he's a preacher. And he can lean into his faith, which I
absolutely.
think may have, a positive effect with a fair number of Christian voters.
Yeah, I don't think Harris is going to run. I really don't. The other person is Pete Buttigieg. I mean, look, Democrats love him. He's a great communicator. Can a gay man win support among black voters in South Carolina? It's an open
And
question.
and a gay man who has never won any election beyond a mayoralty. I think
But he did win the Iowa caucus in 2020, barely.
I mean, yeah, but like, we're talking about a guy like has never won a statewide race anywhere of
Sure,
any sort.
sure, it's true.
Um,
And by the way, is foregoing the chance to run for governor or senator in Michigan,
Michigan. You
which
you 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 want a dark horse name though, Michael?
go
Pat
ahead.
Ryan. No one has gone from the House since like the 1840s.
Ryan. Wow,
He
that
he
is.
won he won a swing district. He ran ahead of Harris by a lot of points.
This is in New York
He
State, right?
Yeah, this is in New York State. He was ran ahead of her by like 10 points. He's a military veteran, which always
Mhm.
seems to work well for Democrats. He's been very outspoken about getting the party back to its blue collar roots. And I think if he wins another big reelection, he may try. I
Mm,
don't think any House member wins, but if you're talking about interesting
that's right.
candidates who
Yeah.
could catch fire on social media and on the campaign trail, that's a name. I mean, it also would not shock me if you see somebody who wins a surprising election somewhere in 2026, then decides that they can immediately run for president because that's what we do now in America. Who runs? But the other thing
Who
I
would that be,
really
though? I don't know who that would be.
James Tallarico in Texas. You're the first Democrat to win in a generation in Texas. All of a sudden, I think you become the biggest star in the party.
I mean,
Um,
I don't know. Maybe I doubt that. That
but
seems a bit of a stretch.
well, look, any Democrat winning in Texas is a stretch. My point is like, if
Yeah, it's
you
true.
come out of nowhere and win in a red place at this point, you're going to get a lot of national attention. And if you get a lot of national attention, every person who gets a lot of national attention immediately decides they can be president of the United States.
No, that's true. It's true. I mean,
You
look,
know,
every politician looks in the mirror and thinks they can be president. I mean,
that's
that's why
exactly
they're
right.
politicians, right? I mean,
That
that's part of the drill.
that is,
I
and the other thing I would say is, and I feel like I have to stress this every time we talk about 2028. Literally, if you go back to this point in 2017 and you had described the Trump impeachment, COVID, everything that happened thereafter, people would have said, "Is this science fiction?" Like there is a long way to go. Or you go back to this point in 2005.
Yeah,
and
I will
everyone was
say that.
talking about Iraq and Social Security. What was the defining issue of 2008? Probably the economic crisis.
But, and
Um,
by the way, nobody, if people had this conversation in 2005, if Substack Live existed, no one would have mentioned Barack Obama. Look, I think at the end of the day, this is, the two most likely candidates are going to be Newsom, or we haven't even mentioned, by the way, Pritzker, who I think is an interesting candidate as well. But two most likely candidates are either Shapiro or Newsom. And I think it's interesting. And I think what people should sort of pay attention to is like that they are running very divergent shadow presidential campaigns. One is riling up one's running for the nomination, one's running for president. And I tend to think the one running for the nomination is the one who usually ends up winning. But I sort of think that Newsom is a bit of a loose cannon. I do think there's a California like tax. I don't think people are love of California politicians. I think Shapiro, I think is a very compelling candidate. We'll see. It's a long way to go. But I do want to mention, because we need to get to 2028 first. And the way things are going, I'm not feeling so confident about that. Let's just talk about really quickly what's happening right now in Chicago. And I wrote about this in my newsletter today, and I hope everyone just a chance to look at it. Jonathan Last has a really important piece in the Bulwark, pointing out just how dangerous the situation is in Chicago. And, I don't think people are fully aware of this, but uh, Trump tried to get J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, to authorize the use of the National Guard in the state. And Pritzker, of course, refused. And instead, Trump, got Governor Greg Abbott of Texas to send troops to Illinois. By the way, just for the record, if Joe Biden had asked J.B. Pritzker to send 300 troops to Texas, there would literally be blood in the streets. I mean, the hypocrisy, the absolute breathtaking hypocrisy of Republicans supporting what is basically an invasion of Illinois by Texas State National Guard is astonishing. Whatever. I guess you should be surprised more by the absolute cynicism of Republicans. Nonetheless, this is a scary moment. But what's really terrifying to me, I wrote about the today, is the ICE officers who are on the ground in Chicago appear to have absolutely no training whatsoever in urban policing. And
and no restraint either.
no restraint. This gets to my next point. What I'm seeing over and over again in these videos is ICE officers escalating situations that should not be escalated, pointing their guns at unarmed civilians, tackling. There was a video that I cannot get over. This video of a man standing on a sidewalk, with an ICE officer asks him to move. He says, "I don't have to move. It's a public sidewalk." This ICE officer puts his gun behind his back, takes his hand, grabs this man by the neck, and tries to throw him to the ground. If that happened in any police force in America, that officer would be fired on the spot. That is absolutely inappropriate behavior. You cannot do stuff like that, not in this day and age. And yet, there is no accountability for what this person did. And I'm sure that man was arrested and probably was in jail and for what? For resisting arrest or who knows, whatever bullshit charges they made up. I mean, these ICE officials have no jurisdiction to be arresting people who are in the sidewalk, interfering with their duties or claiming to interfere with their duties. There's another video I saw of a priest going to an ICE detention facility, praying for these ICE officials and getting shot with pepper balls and getting
And
pepper
Michael,
sprayed in the face.
did you see that there's apparently an ICE officer who shot someone, or a Homeland Security officer who shot someone, and then it seems like the body camera video contradicts the account that like of what was going on,
I've
and
seen
all
this
that.
story. Yes, I've also
Yeah, so
seen, and there's another video I saw and this was confirmed by local police in Chicago, that literally a ICE. By the way, these ICE officers are in unmarked vehicles. They are wearing masks.
the masks.
And this was a video of a ICE officer throwing a tear gas canister out of the car because a motorcycle was blocking his way. Okay. And and I mentioned this in the piece, you can read it. There's a affidavit from a police chief in Illinois saying this is incredibly dangerous. You're basically forcing people to scurry into traffic where they could get hit by cars. And you have, indiscriminate use of tear gas that should not be happening. These are officers that are not qualified to do the work that they're doing. And it is, but what's terrifying is there is no accountability for their actions. Instead, the Trump administration is portraying these officers as the victims of so-called Antifa rioters or what have you. This is terrifying stuff. This is not America.
I think first of all that you're 100% right in everything you say. These people are unqualified, and it's only going to get worse because they keep running these television ads to recruit people to ICE, and they're getting people, I'm sure, who are completely unqualified. And everything about the way ICE has conducted itself since January has been terrible. And has been, from my way of thinking, illegal, unethical. You name the adjectives, negative adjectives, they all apply. They shouldn't be masks. They should not be accosting people on the street. They should only be targeting like this people who have legitimately committed violent crimes. And they're therefore dangerous. And they're doing things that no other police agency in America would get away with. Now,
No,
I will say the chances of a backlash to this are growing every day. There was a new poll. I don't remember if it was NBC today, but it was that like 54% supported deporting undocumented migrants, but like 52% or 53% or something had said that they're going about it the wrong way or going too far or something like that. So I do think that these tactics are causing people to recoil. I do think
I
people are
agree.
saying that is not American. I do think it's problematic. And look, I'd be lying to you, Michael, if I didn't say I look at some of the stuff that Stephen Miller's venomously tweeting and saying, yeah, I'm a little bit worried. This is like, totalitarian shit of like, hey, let's create a pretense to go and seize power and all this other stuff that comes along with it that's really, really, really dangerous. Now, I think that there's going to be some limitations on that, which is, first of all, Trump even mocks Stephen Miller because he's so venomous
But
and
he's
crazy.
but
And
he's basically implementing Stephen Miller's policy agenda.
he is, but I do think that there's like a line for Trump, whereas there isn't for Miller. Like Miller would happily
I
turn
I don't know if
America
I
into
agree
a
with you on
police
that.
state.
I don't know that I
I,
agree with you. Trump said
I,
2 days ago he wanted to impose the Insurrection Act. He said today that Pritzker and Brandon Johnson, the mayor of
you're
Chicago, should
right.
be
No,
arrested.
you're right. But Trump says a lot of stuff. Trump has said a lot of stuff along the way. I'm not entirely sure. And look, let's be clear. I am not entirely sure he wouldn't do that, which scares the everlasting crap out of me. Okay, I'm not trying to defend Trump. I'm just saying that like if Stephen Miller was president, I'd be looking at real estate in Canada right now.
I think Stephen Miller is president. Okay. I wrote this piece back in April or May, making the point that I think Stephen Miller has more control over what's happening in the federal government than Donald Trump does. He's certainly more aware of what's happening. And I want to back to Miller for a second. Stephen Miller is a fascist.
Yeah,
Okay. This isn't even an argument at this point. He is a fascist. He is using rhetoric that dehumanizes his political opponents. Okay. He portrays Democrats as terrorists on an almost daily basis. He called a judge, appointed, by the way,
by
by
Donald
Donald
Trump.
Trump, a terrorist. He is a fascist. He
And,
is the
and,
most
and Michael, we need to touch on one other thing that relates to that. He called a judge, a Trump-appointed judge, a fascist on Saturday night. On
terrorist.
Sunday, a liberal judge in
I
South
know.
Carolina had her house, I think it was arson. I haven't seen that confirmed yet.
So it's not been confirmed that it was arson, and apparently there's evidence it's not arson. Okay,
Okay.
so that I
All
was
right.
going to write about this, but now we're not so sure if it's arson or not. But to
Okay.
your point, the potential for violence based on the rhetoric of Steve Miller, who by the way 3 weeks ago was complaining about the Democrats' rhetoric on Charlie Kirk. There is a real threat here from Stephen Miller, and we have. And look, I I I'm going to write a piece about this week. This is the most dangerous man in America right now.
Yep.
And what you're seeing in the streets of Chicago and in Portland is Stephen Miller's wet dream. This is what he wants. And look, I don't think it's going to take that much for Trump to do something like impose the Insurrection Act. Look, I mean, look what happened in Oregon, right? Federal judge says you cannot send the National Guard. There's no predicate. There's no reason for it to do it. There's no insurrection happening. So what does Trump do? He tries to get the California National, no, was it the California National Guard or some other National Guard or Texas National Guard to go to Oregon? And they're just like, what are you doing? I clearly said that this is not something it's that you can do. So what's the next step? Trump potentially invoking the Insurrection Act.
Well, and then I think the next step for that is a constitutional crisis where
We're
judges
at a
all over the
we are
place.
at a constitutional crisis. We have
Well,
forced
no,
it to
no, no.
have constitutional crisis.
What I'm talking about is judges say, no, you can't do this. There is no insurrection. And Donald Trump saying, I'm ignoring you.
Oh, that's
Something
okay.
that for
That's true.
any other
That would be
president
a ramp
would have
up.
been
Yes.
impeachment and removal from office. And that's where I think that we head if he tries to go there with the insurrection. Um, and we'll see if there's anything at all that this man can do that makes Republicans get off their knees and stop praising the Lord for Donald Trump and doing other things on their knees. Yeah, yeah, I'll go there when
The
it
on your
comes
knees
to
thing
him.
could be read so many ways. That's why I love it. So thank you for
Yeah,
saying that.
but like and look, I tend to, for those of you who subscribe to my Substack, I talk about this kind of stuff less for the simple reason that I don't think there's much we can do about it until 2026, until we win an election and can try to tie their hands with laws. But this is really authoritarian stuff. I think calling Stephen Miller a fascist is too nice. I think he is one of the worst, most hateful human beings on the planet Earth. I think that I want to know who hurt him as a child that turned him. His cousin denounced him on Facebook last week and said,
Yeah.
he went from being a cute Alex P. Keaton type of like, the little Reaganite in the Democratic family to some sort of like evil monster. And I think evil is the right
I,
word
I have
for
no
him.
problem with that language. No, I think it's
None.
completely accurate.
No, and again, I don't think incendiary language helps when we're talking about our political opponents. There are times I have to kind of bite my tongue and not say what I want to say about your run-of-the-mill, spineless Mike Johnson type who is doesn't care about anything other than kissing up to Donald Trump
Yes.
and making sure Donald Trump is happy with him. I have to bite my tongue. A lot of those people are spineless, they're cowards, they're terrible people, maybe, but they're not evil. Stephen Miller is evil. Stephen Miller is a really bad human being. And what's worse is he's an evil human being with a self-righteous streak who thinks that like he's fighting for real Americans.
It's I'm not even sure if he believes that, if he's rhetoric, but I mean, I follow him on Twitter. The things that he says are so over the top, are so inflammatory, I mean, are so dishonest. There is something, and he is so personally repellent. That's the word I best use. He is a repellent human being.
I
And
think, Michael, the most surprising thing that has happened in 21st century America is that he found someone to marry him. That
it's,
that you know, he
I'll never be surprised by the enduring generosity of women than the fact that Steve Miller has a wife and children. He's a kid. I mean,
three, I think.
oh my God. Jesus Christ. Anyway, look, I want to say one other thing too. I am not prone to hysteria. Like I wrote a book a couple years ago called Clear and Present Safety, all about how we get too hysterical about threats and terrorist threats in particular. And we should not I was sort of an argument against exaggeration or threat inflation. I think in this situation, we do not have our hair on fire enough at what's happening. And I mean, look, just like even watching Pam Bondi yesterday testify on Capitol Hill and attacking Senate Democratic, I mean, in a way that violates every existing norm that we've had basically
It was
since
disgraceful.
it was disgraceful. Post Watergate, the idea of politicizing the DOJ was something that every president acknowledged you're not
Uh,
supposed to do.
so somewhere in a grave somewhere, John Mitchell blushed. I think he's dead. I'm pretty
Oh, he's been
sure.
dead. He's been dead for a
Yeah,
long time. Yeah, he's dead for a long
but
time.
I saw that it was so angry because it was so disrespectful and so unattorney general like and so given over to the politicization of something that should not be politicized.
Absolutely.
Pan Bondi is an embarrassment, and I'll tell you, I think there's actually a reason why people don't have their hair more on fire, and the sad truth is that we're getting like geographically narrow authoritarianism. We're getting it in a couple of cities and in a way that doesn't affect most Americans' lives. And what I came away from 2024 believing, Michael, unfortunately, is that most people only care about this stuff a little bit. They care about norms and democracy and all of that in the abstract, but they're not going to get themselves up in arms over
You
this.
know,
Now, they may vote for Democrats because they're scared of this, but and this actually reminds me, since the primary was last night. Um, the race I think that we ought to be watching the most of all the elections this year is the Tennessee House special election in December.
oh,
It
interesting.
is Mark Green was the Homeland Security chairman, and he resigned. The ultimate dick move, which for a politician, which is you run for reelection, last like 4 months, and then cost your state all kinds of money to have a special election because you
Yeah,
went to go get make money.
right,
But it's like a Trump plus 22 seat that touches on part of Nashville because they've gerrymandered Nashville
right.
into uh three districts. And like I don't think the Democrat can win, but if that race ends up being a
Make
three,
it
four,
competitive.
5 point race, I think if I were a Republican, I'd be very afraid and start speaking up against some of this stuff.
I thought interesting last night in Fairbanks, Alaska, the Republican mayor, who apparently has made a lot of anti-LGBT statements and is very extreme, lost his seat to a Democrat. And this is just one more example of these special elections, which Democrats are not just winning, they're dominating. I think this is the thing that also makes me a little crazy about a lot of the conversation about Democrats. You know, this idea that they have to change everything in order to win elections, they are just dramatically overperforming in every single. Now, I grant you that that has been happening for a while now, Democrats, but the level of overperformance is much higher than it's been in the past, which I do think is part of the anti-Trump backlash. It's part of the reason why I think, by the way, Cheryl wins in New Jersey. I think the anti-Trump and I think the California redistricting resolution passes. I think the animus toward Trump is so extreme among Democrats that they are going to vote no matter what. Now, I want to get back to politics a second. I think the stuff in Chicago and Portland. I take your point that there have not been a lot of protests. I don't think this stuff plays very well. I don't think
No, it
this is
doesn't.
stuff.
No,
I don't think it helps
I
Trump.
agree with that. I think it hurts Trump a lot. But what I'm saying is, I think it hurts Trump a lot in that people will vote for Democrats. I don't think it's the kind of thing that, unless it spreads and it's more widespread, that you're going to have massive nationwide protests on a regular
So
basis.
interestingly, there is 2 weeks from, well, a
The
week from
No
Saturday.
Kings, yeah.
Now, I personally have resisted marching in these demonstrations because, as a journalist, I don't think it's appropriate for me to be doing that. I will be marching on October 18th because I think this goes beyond anything we've seen in America in my lifetime. The threats to democracy that we are seeing, the threat that Trump represents, this is to me is not even a partisan issue. I don't think it's a partisan issue. I think it's a small d democratic issue, and it's one that every American should be speaking out more forcefully about. Now, I have been disappointed by the lack of protest. I did notice that in Chicago there have been quite a bit of protests, by the way. I mean, quite a bit of protests, but not at the scale that we might expect. I do think it is depressing that there has not been like I feel like people should be in the streets every day, uh, but I think people feel kind of powerless. I think they feel that
Oh,
what you think they can do about it.
oh.
But I think where it materializes is in elections. Is why you've seen Democrats turning out in such dramatic numbers in elections.
Let me make a play here. I haven't marched in any of these protests going back to the first term because I got to be honest, I don't think protests matter. I don't think that they accomplish anything. I
Oh, I don't
think
agree. I don't. I
that
don't
that
agree.
you're much better off if you want to get involved. My advice is knock on doors for candidates, run for local office, do things that help build infrastructure, explain to your friends and family and neighbors why it's important that they vote in every election, why Trump is so bad. I think we get further doing that stuff that builds political infrastructure. I don't think that there is a lot of evidence that since the 1960s, when protests were very effective, and by the way, in part because they goaded boorish lawmen into doing violent, awful things, just like what ICE is doing. But since then, I don't think we've seen a whole heck of a lot of evidence. There were a lot of protests early in Trump's first term, and I don't think we've seen any correlation
Oh,
between
I
that
disagree.
and like
Oh, let me
electoral
disagree with you.
performance.
Look, I wrote a book about the 1968 election, and I made a point in that book that the political protests did not move public opinion. If anything, it probably moved public opinion against.
Well, that's the other thing.
the anti-war contingent. Let me finish this point. This is important because, in fact, I remember the poll I came up with in '68 that showed that the most unpopular group of Americans were anti-war protesters, even among people who opposed the war in Vietnam. But I disagree with you a little bit because I do think the Women's March and the marches that happened in 2017, I think emboldened is the right word. I think it created sort of cohesion and a sense of esprit de corps among
The
Democrats.
word that you're looking for, I think, is energize.
Well, yes, but it's more than that. I think that, and I remember in 2018, I basically spent like about a week in Tennessee, uh, following canvassers around, all of whom were women, by the way. And I got the impression that they were people who were upset about that Hillary Clinton lost, upset about Trump winning, and who didn't know what to do. And I think that the protest gave them a sense that there was a community of people out there who shared their views. And so I do think it was actually helpful for Democrats. I think, look, Democrats in large part won the House back in 2018 because of women voters, and I do think that stuff made a difference. But I think as a form of public protest, I think it's important. I think it's important for people to be in the streets and to make their voices heard. That's what we still live in a democracy for now, and these things are important. So I do think, even if the political impact is minimal, I think it is important for people to see like-minded individuals, like with them, protesting, especially at a time when there's such hopelessness in the country.
I think that is actually a very good point. I think that it does create community. It does create bonds. And I think that if you have protests that are careful, or carefully constructed, they certainly do no harm. I think if you just start blocking highways and interfering with people's
Yeah,
commutes
stupid.
and doing stuff, you just alienate them.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that.
The one thing I would say is, I do think that what will matter with these protests is, do they pop on TikTok? There was an interesting Peter Hamby column last night that said the Democrats are winning on the shutdown. See, I'm closing us on the note we started with, that said the Democrats were winning on the
Very
shutdown
impressive.
because they were reaching like non-political TikToks. It was this data stuff that was, or people who uh, like ad firms and stuff that study social media, saying that this was popping on social media to a much greater extent than the Republican message, and that it was going viral with accounts that don't usually do politics. And I really think that that is the key, is like, do you get to those less engaged people? Because people like us are up in arms about Trump. We're going to do everything we can to defeat Trump. And even in so much as we're differing on this point, it's all tactical, right? I think you should be doing everything you can do to stop Donald Trump. I just think you're better off donating and door knocking
I
and
say you
that kind
can.
of
Why
stuff.
not just do both? Why can't you do both? People can
If
do
you have the
both.
time and the energy, absolutely. But like, I really do think that what matters the most is, are you getting into those spaces where the less political people are, where they voted for Trump, stayed at home in 2024, the people who are not engaged enough to be up in arms but don't like this kind of behavior. Those are the people that you want to reach, and you want to get engaged and get them to take part in elections and campaigns and things. That's the real key of taking this back. Realistically speaking, winning elections is how we check Donald Trump in the most total way.
Okay, let me just make. I want to make. We should finish up here. I want to make one last point that I think is important to remember. Donald Trump is deeply unpopular. For at this point in his presidency, for a first term, he's the most unpopular president ever, except for Donald Trump in his first term. Um, his favorability has dropped by 9 points since January 20th. His approval rating dropped by 13 points. His policies have been unpopular with the American people. He is underwater on economy, on inflation, amazingly enough, on immigration. Um, and I think, and if you look at the election results we've seen since January, there is enormous energy on the Democratic side. Even if people are not big fans of the Democratic Party, there is enormous, which is also why if you just don't pay attention to approval ratings of Democrats. It doesn't matter. We live in a two-party system.
Doesn't.
You can hate Democrats and still be like, I'm not voting for a Republican. I'll call over glass to vote against a Republican, which is kind of what's happening. In special elections, Democrats are dominating. I think we will have a better sense of where things stand by the governor's elections in Virginia and New Jersey and the redistricting election in California. If Democrats win those races, and right now I mean, look, there's a really good piece on the redistricting, uh, fight in, I think it was in Punch Bowl today, which basically said that Republicans are increasingly skeptical that they can win this. And look, the polls show them losing by 15, 16 points right now. And my general take on this is that there is such anti-Trump animus in the electorate, especially in a place like California, that ultimately that resolution will pass. And by the way, if it passes, it may neutralize most of what Republicans are trying to do in the redistricting,
we,
which
we
is a
we need
huge
to
deal.
talk about this next week because the Supreme Court's going to hear a case next week, I think, that I saw an analysis this morning could net the Republicans 19 seats.
What?
Um, if they overturn this prong of the Rights Act, which seems likely, it'll become a question of timing. If it happens, because it's going to let Republicans redraw like 19 seats across the South to eliminate Democratic seats.
There are not 19 Democratic seats in the South.
No, no. Well, if you include Florida and Texas, like all these
Yeah,
majority
but the Texas
minority
thing
districts,
already happened. Texas thing already
that
happened.
I was skeptical of this, and I read this in literally a few minutes before we hopped on here. But that was the analysis. It was 19
I mean,
seats.
that doesn't seem
Um,
right to me at all. Georgia
it,
has like
it's
what?
one, it's one or two in Georgia. It's one in South Carolina. It's one in Tennessee. It's one in Mississippi. It's one in Louisiana. It's one in Alabama. There's a good chunk. But we could talk about this next week when this
But just
case
keep in
comes
mind,
up.
by the way, that on the voting rights issue, I mean, the last time that the court weighed in on this issue, they ruled in a way that gave Democrats actually additional seats in the South, in
They
Louisiana,
did.
and
The thing that I think has observers concerned is that Kavanaugh wrote in that opinion basically, you didn't ask me to overturn the whole thing, and he was the fifth vote for that. Like, if you raised this question, it might have gone differently. So we'll see what oral arguments look like, but we can talk about that next week. But you're right that California can neutralize things. And the thing that people need to know about every election between now and 2028 is in everything but presidential elections, the people who vote in America are the people who are angry, the people who are
yes,
alienated,
yes,
angry with the people in power. That is why midterms go poorly for the president's party
yes.
almost every time, unless some sort of exogenous shock to the political system happens, or you do something boneheaded. We see you, Newt Gingrich,
Or
and
we see a
ignore.
Herschel Walker
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking of Gingrich trying to impeach Clinton when the polls were like, no,
in
don't
not
do this,
in
and
'98.
they
Yeah,
lost
exactly.
seats in 98. But like, Democrats are the ones who are worked up right now. They are showing up in these special elections. And the only reason it's not been a bigger story is that Trump didn't appoint that many people in Congress to his cabinet, and there weren't that many special elections in red places where it would have mattered. I guarantee you, if this Tennessee seat were to flip, the mainstream media will spend the rest of December losing their minds about what a big wave is coming
Look,
because the media catches on so slowly.
there are two factors that will drive the midterm results, and one is historically the incumbent party does poorly. Two, so three factors. Two, the probably the biggest determining factor in how a party does in a midterm election is the popularity approval rating of the president. Although
Yeah.
2022 was a bit of an exception to that rule, that was because of poor candidates that Republicans nominated.
And
Um,
Dobbs.
and Dobbs, that's true. And the third factor, I think, is what you're seeing in these special elections. I mean, look, there's a reason why Republicans are trying to redraw the maps in all these states because they know they're going to get swamped
Yeah.
without doing that in 2026. Um, but the California thing, just for the record, is huge. And I've seen
Yeah.
5 seats. It could be more than 5 seats could flip. You could have in almost every district being blue in California. It's crazy. The map they're looking at doing could net Democrats maybe 5 to 7 seats. It's a pretty big deal if it happens.
And not only is it a pretty big deal, but it will at least ensure, I think, and let depending on the Supreme Court, but pretty likely ensure that Democrats have a chance of winning the House. If they lose in California and everything goes wrong with redistricting, it may create a margin that is insurmountable in the House. It's not impossible that
I
happens if
mean,
they
it's a
lose California.
three-seat majority right now,
Right.
man.
Right. But if you then add another 20 seats to that, 15, 20 seats, I
They're not
mean,
getting 20 seats. They got 5 in Texas. And by the way, there's no guarantee they win all those seats in Texas. Just for the
right.
record,
That's no,
If Ken Paxton is the Republican Senate nominee, I wouldn't assume that the Republicans run the table in Texas.
I agree with all of that. And again, we can talk about this in detail next week because there's like 3 seats in Florida, one in North Carolina. Like I can do the math and we can go through it
But
and
Florida
talk this through.
has not been redone, and I think Florida's resisted up to this point of redrawing their maps.
The leadership is for it. The state that's resisting, the two states that are resisting, New Hampshire, where Corey Lewandowski is now threatening to primary the governor
Right.
because she won't
Right.
sign, and Indiana have resisted. Everywhere else, they're like flirting with it,
Well,
whether they
Missouri
follow
did it,
through
but
or not.
it's one seat. Kansas is trying to do it, but they have to overcome a veto by the governor. I mean, look, I'm not quite. I don't doubt that this could net Republicans 5 to 10 seats, but maybe more. But if the California thing happens, it basically
Right.
neutralizes what was happening in Texas, and then you're basically talking about a few seats around the margins. So I don't know that
Well,
and
Ohio's going to be two or three. Florida could be two or
that's
three. Like
already going
that.
to happen. That's already going to
Yeah.
happen. Yes, that's
Right, right, right. I mean, we'll see. We'll have a better idea of this down the line. But where you're 100% right is this is a seismic thing. This knocks the entire Texas thing off the map,
it
and it
does.
maybe takes out Missouri. And by the way, the Utah Supreme Court or Utah courts just forced them to draw two competitive districts that are
Right,
winnable for
right.
Democrats.
Right. And we'll see if
So
Democrats.
we'll see.
We'll see what they do in Maryland as well. Although I mean, or Illinois, if they end up trying to do something there, I don't know what's going to happen. But you've got a lot. Look, you got a lot of seats in New York. You got a lot of seats in Pennsylvania. You got seats possibly in Michigan. Maybe Wisconsin. I mean, Derek Van Orden might end up being the most vulnerable incumbent House member in the country. Don Bacon's seat will likely switch. You got a lot, and of course, you got all the California seats. So there's a lot of places where I think Republicans are in danger. And look, you can look at what's happening. There's been
Three seats in
uh,
Iowa,
3 seats in Iowa, absolutely. And look,
couple
how
in
many
Michigan.
it's also really important to note that the resignations among Republicans, it's like in the 20s, over 20. And I mean, that's a big deal. You're not having incumbents running in places, which means that those seats become more vulnerable. It speaks to a lack of energy among Republicans, a lack of a belief that they're going to lose the House. That's not good for them. Democrats recruiting has been really good so far. I mean, for all of these pundit bros who are like Democrats run better candidates, they have literally been able to get the ideal candidate in North Carolina, the ideal candidate in Ohio, Sherrod Brown. In Maine, I mean, I think Janet Mills is probably the best candidate to win there. We'll see. They're doing a very good job of recruiting. And by the way, Republicans are doing a poor job. Right, Chris Sununu is not running for Senate in New Hampshire, which means that he's probably going to go Democratic. Brian Kemp, who would have given John Ossoff a hell of a race in Georgia, he's not running. So those things do matter. But we have got to finish up here. I want to say
Yeah.
one thing though.
Next week we
We
will get into this in more detail, we
we
promise.
will. We ended up today with 216 followers, people on this chat. That number did not go down the entire time. Those of you who stayed with us,
Just
I'm
keeps
so
going up.
appreciative. Keeps going up. I'm so
Yeah.
appreciative of you coming in and listening to us pontificate. And we're going to do this every week. It's a segment we're going to
Mm.
call it Two Jews with Beers Talk Politics. Uh, I'm actually thinking that might be a good name. And we're gonna do this every Wednesday around this time
Yeah.
because it's fun talking with you, man. I love it.
Yeah.
We do this all
Absolutely.
day, and I'm glad that some people came in here and enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much. It means the world to
Yeah.
me, and I know it means the world to
Yeah.
Brian.
So subscribe to Michael Truth and Consequences. Subscribe to the world according to
According to
Brian.
Brian,
Yeah.
yes,
And come back here next week at this time and tell your friends. And hit
friends,
that
tell
like
your
button so
family,
that
hit
people
the like
tune
button.
in.
And
Yeah.
send us your questions because we want to
Yeah.
know what you want to talk about because we will talk about the things that interest you because we love talking about
Yeah,
everything.
maybe we'll throw that out there for our paid subscribers or something where we do something open post where we'll just ask us
Sure.
anything, something.
One last thing before we go. Phillies, are they going to win tonight?
I'm a fatalist, Michael. I've been a Philadelphia sports fan for too long. I sat there all day yesterday daydreaming about miracle scenarios, but the likelihood is they're going to get crushed.
I
And I'm
think
going to
so.
be sad again
You
because
want to
this
hear?
is
You
what
want to
this
hear
team
bad?
does to my soul.
I got one for you. My brother, who lives in Israel, he came in with his son, who's 18, who's a huge Philly sports fan. Okay, they went to the game, the Saturday game against the Dodgers, which the Phillies lost in the seventh inning.
The Eagles game on
They
Sunday.
went to the Eagle game on Sunday, which they lost, and then they went to the game on Monday, which they also lost. So rough weekend for him, and for my
I
nephew.
can I wasn't even there in person and I can tell you I just pouted for like 3 days. I got nothing done. I was like my girlfriend kept trying to cheer me up and it was like you don't understand this can't be fixed. I even had a White House reporter send me a message saying that she laughed out loud at something I tweeted about there not being enough drugs in the world to convince someone that the Phillies could win this series. But like this team just breaks my heart and has for my entire
Every
life.
year. every year.
every single year, and it is just a rough time. Hug your favorite Philadelphian this week. We are suffering. Um,
Except for
uh,
2009. Except for 2009.
2008. That was
That was
it,
eight. Sorry, eight.
and
Sorry.
but really, that was the one week of my life that I was like, is this real? First, the Phillies won the World Series, and then a Democrat won the presidency for the first time that I really cared about politics,
Incredible, right?
and it was unbelievable. But this team just made me want to throw things at the television this weekend. It was ugly, and
I'm
I
sorry, man.
can't imagine it gets better. But I hope. I hope I'm wrong. I keep saying this to people who are like, well, why are you so fatalist? I'm like, look, I want to be wrong more than anything else. But Philadelphia sports teams have been doing this to me my
Look,
entire life.
let me
I'm
say one thing to you,
42.
Brian. Brian, I'm a Detroit Lions fan. I know fatalism. Trust me. I know fatalism. All right,
It's
we gotta
true.
go. We gotta
All
go.
right, take care. We will talk
We'll
to you
see
next
you
week.
next week. Absolutely. Have a great week,
All right,
guys.
take
See you
care,
later.
everybody.
Yep. Bye bye.
Bye.